The twin moons of planet Aroxa had barely dipped beneath the horizon when the Academy transport ship descended into the lower atmosphere, shuddering with turbulence as it pierced the thick, dry layers of sand-laden wind. Inside the hold, a group of 30 cadets from 12 different species stood in silence, strapped into their compartments, eyes narrowed, pulses elevated. Most of them had trained for years for this, what the Galactic Academy called the Final Surface Simulation, a practical test meant to determine which cadets were truly ready for interspecies command duties. All they had been told was, no technology, no weapons, no communication. Survive for 5 days on an uncharted world with natural resources only. Each cadet was given a small utility pouch. No tools, just basics. Cloth, a bit of wire, fire-starting gel, and a ration bar that would barely last a day. Among the group was a human cadet named Alex Grant. He was 23 from Earth, and the only human among the candidates this year. He didn't speak much during the initial briefings. While others compared body chemistry tolerances or argued over planetary terrain hypotheses, Alex had simply observed, memorized, and kept quiet. He was used to being underestimated. Most cadets saw humans as primitive, slow-evolving death-worlders, only interesting because of their high pain tolerance and chaotic historical record. But in truth, Alex didn't mind the low expectations. It allowed him to focus without the noise of competition. The ship landed with a jolt, throwing clouds of red dust high into the air. The rear hatch hissed open, and the blinding brightness of Aroxa's triple suns flooded the cabin with golden fire. Cadets stepped out one by one, adjusting their vision lenses, covering their heads with whatever fabrics they had. The heat was immediate, choking, the kind that seemed to wrap around bones and press into lungs with every breath. Alex stepped out last, his boots sinking slightly into the granular surface, the sand unusually fine, almost like powder. It was early morning, but already the temperature hovered around 45 degrees Celsius. The terrain stretched endlessly in all directions. Dunes, cracked salt flats, and occasional jagged rock formations. There were no visible water sources, no shade apart from the occasional withered stalk of alien flora that looked brittle enough to disintegrate at a touch. Within seconds, several cadets began spreading out, some in pairs, some alone, determined to claim ground and scout resources. The Lithari, tall insectoid beings with reflective exoskeletons, headed southeast toward the rock formations. The Narine, aquatic mammals adapted for cooler climates, looked visibly uncomfortable and stuck together in a tight group, moving northward. The more aggressive Zygon lizards sprinted ahead without discussion, confident their muscular legs and high stamina would give them an advantage. Alex didn't move immediately. Instead, he knelt, scooping a handful of sand into his palm, rubbing it between his fingers, testing its dryness, its texture. He looked at the sun angles, noted wind direction, scanned for tracks. There were none. This planet had either no active wildlife or whatever lived here stayed well hidden. Good. That meant fewer unexpected variables. He adjusted his pack, tied his jacket around his head as a makeshift turban, and began walking west, not fast, but steady, eyes always scanning. His mind moved quicker than his feet. If he were on Earth, he'd be looking for elevation first. For signal, for air currents, for a better view. But here, he needed shade, water, and shelter. Elevation would only bring more sun exposure. 2 hours in, cadets were already beginning to realize how serious this would be. The Lithari had returned to the drop zone, unable to climb the brittle rocks with their delicate joint plates. One of them had suffered what looked like a shell fracture on his left thorax and lay under a metallic sheet, panting and overheating. The Narine had tried to dig into the salt flats with their claws to access cooler soil beneath, but found the crust so hard it broke their digits. The Zygon had disappeared into the horizon, but one was seen vomiting yellow bile from heat shock just an hour later. Alex found what he had been looking for. A small depression in the ground, where sand had gathered around a thick cluster of dark green plants. They stood maybe shoulder height, spiny and dense, with swollen stems covered in waxy thorns. He smiled faintly. They resembled Earth's cacti, though taller and pulsing slightly at the base, as if adjusting to the heat. He didn't touch them. Not yet. First, he took off his cloth pouch and began to set up a rudimentary shade using his jacket and two bent sticks he carved from broken stalks. Once he had a triangle of shadow, he sat beneath it and watched the plant for a full hour. It wasn't caution that made him wait, it was habit. On Earth, many desert plants looked alike but hid toxins or parasites that could ruin a survival attempt. Here, he assumed the risk was greater. He watched insects move toward one stalk but stop abruptly, skirting its base. Another had bite marks on its surface but no visible damage to creatures nearby. That one might be edible, or at least not lethal. He drew symbols into the sand to track which ones insects avoided, which were approached, which dripped any kind of moisture when the sun reached peak heat. Around midday, when most cadets had begun retreating into makeshift tents or collapsing from sunstroke, Alex made his first move. He took the wire from his pouch, sharpened the end using a flat rock, and carefully pierced the side of the stalk with visible bite marks. A hiss escaped. A stream of thick, translucent gel oozed out, warm but rich in moisture. It was bitter, his tongue curled at the taste, but it didn't burn. No numbness, no dizziness. He spat it out just in case, then waited another half hour. When no ill effects followed, he harvested more and collected it in a scrap of synthetic cloth. By late afternoon, he had created a small trench to shield his sleeping area from wind, used his gel packet to rub over his skin and reduce evaporation, and marked 3 more cacti as potential sources. He returned briefly to the drop zone to check if any cadets had returned. A few had. One Lithari was unconscious, his chitin cracked from internal heat. A Nareen cadet lay curled in a fetal position under a collapsed tarp. No instructors, no medics. That was part of the test. They wouldn't intervene unless it was fatal. Alex crouched next to the Nareen and offered her a bit of the cactus gel. She looked at it suspiciously, sniffed, then sipped. Her eyes widened, not from pleasure but from the immediate sensation of hydration. She didn't thank him. She didn't need to. Her gaze said enough. That night, as the desert dropped from blistering heat to bitter cold, Alex curled into his trench, wrapped in his jacket, using cactus pulp as insulation around his feet. The stars above shimmered unnaturally, green, blue, orange, a reminder that this wasn't Earth. But survival, he thought, was always the same. It was never about tech. It was about patience, observation, and knowing what to touch, and what not to. The first day was over. Others had faltered, and some wouldn't make it through the second. But Alex had found water, and tomorrow he would teach someone how to find it too. By sunrise on the second day, the desert had already shed its cold skin and begun to radiate heat in slow, merciless waves. The sand beneath Alex's boots was still cool enough to walk on without damage, but he knew it wouldn't last long. He'd slept in short intervals, waking every hour to check the wind direction and confirm that no larger predators were tracking him. So far, there were no signs of animal life, just insects and the soft, strange pulsing of the cactus-like plants that dotted the lower dunes. He stretched his arms, packed up his small trench camp, and scanned the horizon for movement. A thin trail of dust to the north suggested someone had started walking before dawn. He tied his jacket over his head again, gathered 2 cactus sacks filled with gelled water, and began walking toward the drop zone, not out of obligation, but instinct. Something told him others would need help this morning. He didn't get far before the heat returned in full force. The triple suns of Aroxa were merciless, each casting a different angle of shadow, creating strange illusions across the landscape. The air shimmered above the dunes, making objects appear to float or melt into the horizon. Even Alex, as hydrated and rested as he was, felt the dull, nauseating throb of dehydration building at the base of his skull. He adjusted his pace, slowed his breathing, and focused on movement efficiency. By the time he reached the drop zone, the makeshift tents from the day before had collapsed, blown apart by wind or abandoned. 3 cadets lay motionless on the sand, faces sunburned, lips cracked. He recognized the Zygon male, Rathik, sprawled face down near one of the torn shelters, his scaly skin a pale, unhealthy gray. Rathik had been arrogant and loud during training, always bragging about his species' endurance. Now he was unconscious, his claws twitching slightly. Alex dropped to one knee and rolled him over. The male's pulse was weak but steady. His internal systems were clearly failing. Whatever biological cooling mechanism his species relied on wasn't built for this level of sustained heat. Alex pulled a strip of cloth from his bag, soaked it in cactus gel, and began patting the Zygon's neck and joints. The gel dried quickly, absorbed through the scales. He took a small sip of his own gel ration and carefully fed another into Rethic's mouth. The lizard-like cadet gagged once, then swallowed. His eyes fluttered but didn't open. Alex placed a flat rock under his head for shade and left him there. If he survived the next few hours, he'd wake up. If not, there was nothing more that could be done. The rules were clear. Further across the dune, Alex saw a familiar figure. Sarah, the Nareen cadet he had helped the previous day. She was kneeling beside a second cadet who appeared to be shivering despite the heat. Her blue-gray fur was matted with sweat, and her breathing was shallow. The cadet next to her was another Nareen, a male, older than most, with broad shoulders and a long snout. His skin had dried and cracked along his neck gills. Sarah looked up when she saw Alex approaching. "He hasn't moved in 2 hours," she said, her voice hoarse. "I tried to share my water, but he won't swallow. I think his glands shut down." Alex crouched beside the male, touched his wrist, and shook his head. "He's close to organ failure," he said quietly. "His kind isn't built for this. No humidity, no relief." Sarah exhaled through clenched teeth and looked away. Her hands trembled slightly. "I should have taken him back last night. He wanted to find a shaded cliff east of here. Thought there'd be moisture in the rock." "Cliffs are 30 kilometers in that direction," Alex said. "He was never going to make it." He didn't say it with judgment. Just truth. The Nareen female nodded once, stiffly, as if she already knew and only needed someone else to say it aloud. A sudden, high-pitched cry cut through the air. Alex spun around, instinct kicking in, and spotted a Lithari male stumbling through the sand, one leg dragging behind the other. His kitten plates were cracked open across the back, seeping orange fluid, and his left eye was completely opaque. He was muttering in short, sharp bursts in his native clicking tongue, though the translation implant flickered on and off. "Too hot! Sensors! Fracture! Can't see! Can't see!" Alex sprinted to meet him, catching the tall insectoid just as he collapsed. The male was too heavy to lift entirely, but Alex managed to drag him into the partial shade of a collapsed tent. He used cactus gel again, applying it between the Lithari's thoracic plates and over his eye. The male flinched violently, clicking louder, but settled as the gel began to cool his systems. Alex turned to Sarah. "I need help keeping him cool. Do you still have that fabric wrap from your ration bag?" She nodded and tossed it over. Alex soaked it in his remaining gel and wrapped it tightly around the Lithari's core. Then he stood, scanning the drop zone. Nearly a third of the cadets were already incapacitated, some from heat stroke, others from failed biological adaptations. There was no sign of academy instructors, no medevac shuttles, no assistance. This was still part of the test, even if it bordered on cruelty. Alex knew he couldn't help everyone. He needed to find more cactus plants, more shade, and more stable shelter before midday. He looked at Sarah. Her hands were still shaking, but her eyes had cleared. "If you want to live," he said, "come with me. We can't stay here." She hesitated for only a second before nodding. Together, they left the drop zone behind, climbing over the dunes with careful, deliberate steps. By midday, they reached another depression in the landscape, where more cacti grew. This patch was larger than the one Alex had used before, at least 24 stalks, some already bursting with moisture from the heat. Sarah collapsed under the shadow of one and began massaging her joints. "How did you know this would be here?" she asked. "I didn't," Alex replied. "I looked for insects, tracks. Birds would have been better, but nothing flies in this heat. The sand dips lower here, collects moisture from below." Sarah stared at him. "You're not just surviving," she said. "You're reading the planet." Alex didn't answer. He pulled out a piece of wire and began slicing open a cactus. The pulp inside shimmered like wet glass. He harvested what he could, storing it in pieces of cloth and tattered fabric. The sun climbed higher. The heat turned savage. But Alex kept working, focused, methodical. Sarah eventually joined him, copying his movements. She wasn't as precise, but she learned fast. By late afternoon, they had gathered enough gel to hydrate several cadets. As the wind began to pick up again, lifting fine grains of sand into the air, Alex wrapped the supplies and looked back toward the drop zone. "We go back," he said. "Back?" Sarah blinked in disbelief. "You want to bring this to them?" "They'll die tonight if we don't," he said simply. She didn't argue. They moved through the dunes like ghosts, their packs now heavy with life. By the time they reached the drop zone, the sun was setting, and the air had begun to cool slightly. Several cadets were still conscious, curled into the shallow shadows of debris. Others were gone. Alex didn't stop to check who. He and Sarah moved quickly, distributing gel, treating burns, covering cracked skin. Rethik was still breathing. The Lithari male had stabilized. Sarah found another Nareen cadet, this one still lucid, and taught her how to harvest the cactus pulp. No one spoke much. Words weren't necessary. The cadets saw what Alex had done, what he continued to do, and they understood something quietly humiliating. All of their pride, all of their technology-based arrogance had meant nothing on this planet. It was the human, silent, methodical, overlooked, who had figured out how to live here. As night fell, the stars once again blanketed the sky, cold and vibrant. The drop zone was no longer silent. Cadets huddled together, some talking, others resting. Alex sat alone near his trench, sharpening his wire tool with a rock. His hands were blistered. His face was burnt. But he wasn't done. Tomorrow would be harder. Tomorrow others might look to him for more than just water, and he'd be ready. The third morning dawned without ceremony. The red glare of Aroxa's suns cracked over the edge of the eastern dunes and bathed the land in a light so sharp it seemed to slice the shadows into ribbons. Heat rose almost instantly. Alex was already awake, squatting beside the small fire pit he had constructed using curved metal fragments and volcanic rock he had gathered overnight. He wasn't trying to cook. Fire, here, was about morale, about commanding control over something elemental in a world that offered no kindness. The others stirred slowly. Some still couldn't move. Others were recovering, awkward in their humility. Rethik, the Zygon male, sat up with difficulty, his chest heaving. His eyes, once arrogant and dismissive, were now heavy with caution. Sarah knelt beside a younger cadet whose body was lined with burns and pressed cactus gel onto her shoulders. There was a subtle shift in the way the group looked at Alex now. No one had said the words, but it was there, in their silence, in their waiting. He had become something they didn't understand, but instinctively recognized. Not a leader in the traditional sense, no speeches, no commands, but the one who acted when no one else did. By midday, the heat had begun to ripple with a violent pulse. One of the Lithari cadets collapsed while trying to adjust a broken tarp, and Sarah rushed to help him. Alex didn't move. His hands were busy cutting strips from cactus skin, scraping the fibrous interior with a piece of sharpened bone. The others watched, puzzled. A Zygon female stepped closer and grunted. "What are you doing?" He didn't look up. "Filtering." The word meant nothing to her. "Filtering what?" "Water," he replied. "The gel is usable, but the cleaner it is, the less risk of internal damage. Some of you will start getting sick if we don't refine it." The female narrowed her eyes. "We're still alive. For now." She didn't answer. She backed away, watching from a distance as he arranged 3 stones into a triangle and placed a makeshift bowl of hollowed rock in the center. Above it, he tied the cactus fiber into a loose bundle and suspended it with a framework of sticks and cloth. Then, slowly and methodically, he squeezed the gel through the fibers. Drop by drop, a clearer liquid began to gather in the bowl. Not pure, but better. Drinkable. He collected the first batch, tasted it, nodded once, and poured it into a flat container made from melted supply plastic. Rethik dragged himself over, resting on his elbows. "You could have told us." Alex gave him a sideways glance. "And you would have listened?" The male's jaw tightened. "I would have." "No, you wouldn't," Alex said simply. "But you will now." By late afternoon, 4 cadets were copying the process. Some made mistakes, over-squeezing, contaminating the drops, but others learned quickly. Sarah adapted first, always watching Alex's hands, mirroring his techniques. Her method became the most efficient after his. The others began to defer to her as well, asking quietly instead of demanding. Even the Lithari, too proud to speak aloud, clicked questions through their native frequency, which Sarah translated without hesitation. Alex didn't ask for help, but he didn't refuse it. When one cadet burned her hand trying to heat a damp rock to boil water, he gave her the better stones he had prepared the night before. When another ran out of cloth, he showed him how to peel the inner bark from a dry root tree and twist it into a filter rope. He never said more than needed. Words wasted energy. In the evening, the wind changed. A storm was coming. Not rain, but wind thick with stinging sand. Alex wrapped his face early, instructing Sarah to anchor every tarp and tie each plant shelter down with weighted stones. The others followed quickly, learning now to anticipate rather than react. The storm hit before sunset, sharp, angry gusts that ripped through the camp, flattening the lighter structures and sending unsecured materials flying. One cadet, a tall Avex male with gliding membranes, lost his entire camp and was buried up to his waist in a sand drift before Alex pulled him out. The male didn't speak a word of thanks. He simply sat beside Alex's trench afterward, watching him work. That night, Alex didn't sleep. The air was charged. Something was shifting beyond weather. He felt it in the way the horizon flickered with faint pulses of blue light, barely visible beneath the starlight. It wasn't natural, and it wasn't random. He didn't mention it to the others. Not yet. Instead, he kept refining the filter. On the fourth iteration, he added a layer of crushed charcoal he had made from cactus husks and fire ash. The results were visibly clearer. He tested again. No bitterness, no film. Sarah drank it and nodded. "You could teach this at the academy," she said. "I'd rather not," he replied. "Why?" He paused. "Because it wouldn't matter there. It only matters here." In the quiet afterwards, Sarah said nothing. She simply moved back to the others and began helping a Lithari cadet rebuild his filter frame. By dawn of the fourth day, every surviving cadet had built some version of the water filter Alex had invented. Some used modified designs, others copied his exactly. The camp had transformed. No longer a group of isolated, dying elites, but a fragile collective bound by adaptation. The only difference between them and failure had been one cadet's memory of ancient, simple survival. Fire, water, shelter. Not algorithms, not injectors, not energy cells. And yet, none of it was driven by ego. Alex never claimed credit. He only acted, and others chose to follow. The instructors had likely been watching the entire time. He didn't care. The test had already ended for him the moment others had started surviving because of what he built. The real exam wasn't about endurance. It was about whether anyone would learn from something as crude and overlooked as a cactus and a piece of cloth. He stood beneath the pale morning sky, watching the dunes shift again in the distance. More cadets were stirring now, already moving to collect gel, clean water, reinforce structures. No one waited for instructions. No one barked orders. The arrogance had faded. In its place, motion, effort, quiet understanding. Alex didn't smile. He didn't need to. He was already thinking about what would be needed next. The planet hadn't finished testing them yet. He could feel it pressing against the edges of the wind, and whatever came, he would be ready. The fourth day began without ceremony, but there was a tension in the air that hadn't existed before. The wind had softened overnight, but it carried an edge now, dry, electric, almost expectant. Alex stood at the edge of the makeshift encampment, his back to the rising suns, eyes locked on the far-off ridge where the horizon shimmered in distorted waves. The flickering blue pulses he had seen the previous night had returned, fainter in daylight but unmistakable. They moved in patterns, like heartbeat rhythms against the atmosphere. He suspected it wasn't natural, and whatever it was getting closer. Behind him, the cadets moved like parts of a slowly awakening organism. A Lithari male, Thrix, as Sarah had called him, had constructed a lattice of fiber and bark to reinforce his shelter. His clicks were sharp and purposeful as he worked, antennae twitching slightly when he saw Alex glance over. Sarah knelt beside a newly constructed filtration pit, showing a younger cadet, a Rilan girl with scaled hands and fragile limbs, how to layer sand between folds of cactus skin. The Rilan girl had burned her fingers the day before, trying to boil cactus pulp directly. Now she listened intently, hands trembling as she mimicked Sarah's movements. Alex moved through the growing camp without saying much. He helped silently where needed, tightening knots, adjusting frames, replacing brittle fibers with dampened strips to prevent cracking under the noon sun. As he worked, he noticed something he hadn't expected. The cadets were talking, not loud or boastful like they once had, but asking questions, giving explanations. A Zygon male was showing a Nareen female how to use flat rocks to redirect the sun's glare toward a boiling bowl. A Lithari was sketching diagrams into the sand for a 2-stage filtration chamber. The cadets weren't just copying anymore. They were innovating. It was exactly what Alex had hoped for, and it unsettled him. He wasn't used to influence. On Earth, in the forests of the Rockies where he'd grown up with his grandfather, survival was solitary. You learned from others only when you failed alone. But here, in the heat of Aroxa's cruelty, the cadets were becoming something else. Less a collection of species, more a learning ecosystem. It was beautiful and dangerous at once. Knowledge gave life. But dependency came next, and he couldn't afford for anyone to rely on him when the flickering blue on the ridgeline kept getting brighter. He returned to his trench after midday, pulling a tarp over a fresh batch of cactus gel. Sarah approached with quiet steps. Her cheeks were blistered, but her posture was strong, eyes focused. "You've seen it too, haven't you?" she asked. Alex didn't look up. "The lights." She nodded. "What do you think it is?" He pulled a cactus husk from the fire pit and broke it in half. "I don't think it matters what I think. It's coming either way." "Are we in danger?" "Not yet." Sarah sat beside him, dusting sand off her knees. "You know, they'll remember this, the others, what they've learned here. It's already started to spread. The Zygon built a net for catching sand beetles. Said it came to him after watching the Lithari stack stones for airflow." Alex gave a soft exhale. They're learning the way they should have from the start. Not from instruction manuals, from failure, from watching, from each other. She looked at him closely. "You didn't come here just to pass, did you?" "No." "Then why?" Alex stared at the cactus husk in his hand. To see if anyone else still had the instincts to survive without machines, without algorithms telling them what to do. Sarah tilted her head. "You could have done this all on your own." "I have before." "Then why share it?" He met her gaze finally. "Because I was tired of watching people die just because no one showed them how to boil water." She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Instead, she stood and nodded once before heading toward the others, calling over the Rilan girl and the Avex male to show them a new knot she'd devised for wind stabilization. Alex watched her go, then turned his eyes back to the ridge. The blue shimmer was clearer now, more defined, like veins of energy threading through the sand. He moved before the light faded, hiking alone toward a smaller rise near the camp's edge. From there, he saw the first real sign of motion, an object gliding low across the sand, too smooth to be natural, too quiet to be a creature. It left no trail, no sound, just a faint pressure in the air that made the hairs on his arms rise. He dropped low, heart steady, breath shallow. The object hovered for several seconds, scanning. A reconnaissance drone. Not Academy standard. Civilian maybe, or something older. When it vanished, he waited a full hour before returning to camp. The others had started preparing for night. Fires were lit, stones warmed. Water was being shared with a kind of unspoken grace. One Zygon cadet, the same who had scoffed at him 2 days earlier, now sat beside the youngest Nareen girl, teaching her how to wrap cloth around her ears to prevent frostbite during the cold winds. No translator was needed, just hands, gestures, and intent. Alex called Sarah aside and spoke low. "There's something moving beyond the ridge. Not Academy tech. We need to prepare for visitors." "Visitors?" "Could be a test. Could be scavengers, could be worse. Doesn't matter." "What do we do?" He pointed toward the cactus grove. "We hide the supplies, the filtered water, the fire materials, split it across the camp. Nothing in one place. Teach 3 others how to build the filter from scratch. Don't tell them why." Sarah didn't question. She simply nodded and walked off, quiet and fast. By the time the stars emerged, the cadets had unknowingly prepared themselves for disruption. No panic, no shouting, just movement, subtle but deliberate. Alex kept his distance, watching them work. It felt less like survival now and more like discipline. Each of them had begun teaching others without realizing they had become teachers themselves. He crouched at the edge of camp once more, blade in hand, eyes scanning the dark. The desert had become a classroom, but tomorrow, it might become a battlefield. The 5th day arrived heavy with silence. Not the peaceful kind, but a silence that stretched taut like a wire under tension, the kind that warned something was about to snap. The cadets moved through morning routines with quiet precision. Fire pits lit, cactus pulp prepared, filters reinforced and concealed. Even those who had once grumbled now understood how to move with purpose. No one complained. No one joked. Beneath their stripped-down shelters and hand-woven shade cloths, every cadet felt it, that low, invisible hum building across the sand. Alex stood alone atop the western ridge, a sharpened spike of obsidian in his right hand and a slab of sand-warmed stone pressed against his left arm. His muscles ached from 4 nights of short sleep and relentless sun, but he remained still, his eyes locked on the ridgeline where the flickering blue had last appeared. He didn't have to wait long. Shortly before the second sun cleared the horizon, 3 objects emerged from the glare. Not drones, not shuttles, something older. Metallic hulls scorched by time, matte black armor patterned with deep violet scars. Scavenger craft, autonomous, obsolete by Academy standards, but still lethal. They glided over the sand in tight formation, low to the surface, scanning. 2 hovered while the third dropped what looked like a sensor rod. It embedded itself into the dune and released a pulse that vibrated through the soles of his feet. He crouched instantly, signaling to Sarah below with a small hand flick. She saw him and nodded, disappearing behind the cactus grove. Within seconds, the others followed, each cadet slipping into predetermined hiding spots, every piece of vital material buried or covered. No one panicked. No one needed to be told what to do. Alex had taught them how to move like prey that didn't act like prey, disciplined, invisible, unbroken. One of the scavenger ships peeled off and swept toward the drop zone. A projection beam flared from beneath its nose, casting symbols across the sand. The cadets couldn't translate them, but Alex could. He read the faded galactic glyphs. Bioscan zone, material recovery in progress, do not interfere. The drones were here to scavenge tech and biological remains from failed training scenarios, which meant only one thing. The Academy had assumed casualties, enough to authorize recovery, enough to think some of the cadets were dead. He swallowed the bitter taste rising in his throat. There was no confirmation process. The simulation was strict by design. Once the system detected a threshold of life sign failures, it triggered autonomous cleanup. No instructor arrived to verify. No supervisor scanned for survivors. The machines moved slowly, methodically. One scooped the remnants of a collapsed shelter. Another collected a cadet's bloodied cloth, discarded days ago, left behind near a cracked tarp. The third ship began scanning the shallow trenches. It passed within 15 meters of a Lithari cadet who lay half-buried beneath a woven cover of bark and sand. The male didn't flinch. His body remained perfectly still, even as a light swept across his face and the shadow of the machine passed over his limbs. The sensor clicked off. The ship moved on. Alex waited, heart hammering once every few seconds, until the last drone rejoined its companions and climbed back toward the upper thermals. He watched them disappear into the pale sky, shrinking into flickering dots until they were gone. The hum faded. The pressure in the air lifted. Only then did he descend the ridge and signal all clear. Sarah emerged first, then Thrix, then the rest. No one cheered. There was no celebration. Only slow, quiet exhalations of breath that had been held too long. By mid-morning, the sky shifted again, not with tension, but with movement that brought relief. A real Academy transport ship pierced through the clouds with a trail of plasma smoke, its body gleaming clean and unmarred. This one didn't scan. It landed. The back ramp opened with a hiss, and 3 instructors stepped out. 2 Avex males in black uniforms and 1 human woman with gray eyes and a steel jaw. She held a digital slate and looked over the encampment as if she were assessing a battlefield. Her eyes paused when they met Alex's. She didn't speak. Instead, she turned and began recording data from each cadet. The cadets stood in a half-formed line, blistered, sunburned, exhausted, but alive. One by one, they were scanned for vitals and confirmed present. The human woman stopped when she reached Sarah. "Vitals stabilized, moderate dehydration, no infection." She paused. "Who taught you how to purify plant gel without a centrifuge?" Sarah glanced sideways at Alex. "He did." The woman looked at him. "Name?" "Alex Grant." She tapped her slate. "Report says your file flagged you as a low-strategy, high-survival profile. Poor leadership aptitude." "I know," he said. "Report was wrong." She turned without waiting for a reply and made a final sweep of the camp before giving the command to board. The cadets filed into the ship silently, carrying only what they had made: filters, tools, cactus satchels. No tech, no weapons. Only the knowledge carved into their minds and into their hands. Alex was the last to enter. Before stepping inside, he looked back once at the desert that had nearly killed them all. The place that had stripped their egos and burned away illusion. It had turned warriors into learners, competitors into collaborators, survival into discipline. He would not forget it. The human woman stood beside the pilot's seat as the ship ascended. She studied him for a moment, then finally spoke again. "You altered the outcome of the entire group. 13 cadets were projected to die by day 3. Only 3 fatalities occurred. And your methods were non-technical, analog. I didn't do it for recognition. I know, that's why it worked." She handed him the slate. He scanned it. It wasn't a performance review. It was a formal recommendation. "Instructor program?" he asked. She nodded. "Field Survival Division. Off-world training. We need someone who doesn't teach from manuals." He looked down at the slate, then at the cadets behind him, some asleep, others staring out the windows at the endless dunes growing smaller and smaller. Sarah caught his eye and nodded once. He signed the form. The desert vanished beneath clouds. The ship broke atmosphere and accelerated toward orbit. Aroxa faded behind them, a world that had taken so much but given something few ever gained in simulations: truth without ego, strength without pride. Alex leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes, not to rest, but to remember. He wasn't just a survivor anymore. He was the one who taught others how to survive, and that, in the end, was what made the difference.